She had been drinking coffee every morning for 41 years. 2 cups, always with milk, sometimes cream. And this wasn't some absent-minded habit. She'd actually watched one of my earlier videos about the compounds in coffee that fight inflammation, protect against liver disease, and may even reduce certain cancer risks. So, she felt great about her routine. Her morning ritual was working. Or so she believed. But when I came across a paper from the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition that measured what happens to those protective compounds when you add dairy to coffee, everything I thought I understood about this topic flipped. The study showed that milk protein, specifically casein, latches onto the very molecules that make coffee protective. It clings to them. And when that happens, your body can't absorb them. The compounds are still in your mug. They just never reach your bloodstream. I'll tell you exactly what that means and why the percentage drop is bigger than most people would guess. But first, there's something else hiding in your coffee that almost nobody is talking about. And this one has nothing to do with what you stir in. It's in the beans themselves. I spend my weeks deep in the research so you don't have to. As always, what I'm sharing today is for educational purposes. If you're on medication or have a diagnosed condition, talk to your doctor before making changes to your health routine. Here's the full picture before we dive into the science. There are 2 things you should fix in your coffee routine starting tomorrow morning. First, if you're adding milk or cream, you're blocking up to 28% of the chlorogenic acid absorption. Chlorogenic acids are the main polyphenol compounds responsible for coffee's anti-inflammatory and anti-cancer powers. The fix is easy. Drink your coffee black or switch to a non-dairy option that doesn't contain casein: oat milk, almond milk, coconut milk. Second, if you're drinking conventional mass-produced coffee, there's a real chance it contains ochratoxin A, a mycotoxin produced by mold during storage that damages mitochondrial DNA. The fix? Switch to specialty-grade single-origin coffee that's been tested for mycotoxins, or at minimum, buy whole bean and grind fresh. Pre-ground coffee has much higher mycotoxin exposure due to surface area and storage time. Those are your 2 moves. Now, let me show you why each one matters far more than you'd expect. The first issue, casein binding. And this is the one that genuinely frustrated me when I read the data. Your morning coffee contains chlorogenic acids. These are polyphenol compounds that have been studied extensively for their effects on inflammation, blood sugar regulation, and cancer cell inhibition. A 2022 meta-analysis in Nutrients reviewing 37 studies on coffee polyphenols and chronic disease found consistent links between chlorogenic acid intake and reduced risks of type 2 diabetes, liver fibrosis, and colorectal cancer. The numbers are not small. Regular coffee consumption was tied to a 12% lower risk of type 2 diabetes and a 14% lower risk of liver-related mortality. Simply put, these are some of the most studied protective compounds in any common drink. They're the reason coffee keeps showing up as beneficial in large population studies. The World Health Organization actually reversed its earlier position and removed coffee from its list of possible carcinogens based on the accumulated evidence. Your morning cup, consumed correctly, is working for you at the cellular level. But here's the catch. A study published in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition by Duarte and Lunsford measured polyphenol bioavailability in human subjects after consuming coffee with and without milk. The results were clear. Adding milk cut chlorogenic acid absorption by up to 28%. The mechanism is straightforward. Casein, which is the dominant protein in cow's milk, has a high binding affinity for polyphenolic compounds. It physically wraps around them in the digestive tract, forming complexes too large to cross the intestinal wall. The polyphenols are still there. You can measure them in the cup, but they pass through your digestive system without ever entering your bloodstream. In plain English, you're drinking coffee for the health perks, adding milk because it tastes better, and losing nearly a third of the reason it's good for you. Robert, 63, had been adding heavy cream to his 2 morning cups for over 20 years. Not because he particularly loved it, it had just become automatic. His wife poured cream, so he poured cream. He'd also been spending about $40 a month on polyphenol supplements, grapeseed extract, quercetin, green tea capsules, because he'd read that polyphenols were important for cardiovascular health after 60. And he was right. They are. But here's the irony that hit him when he saw this data. He was paying for extra polyphenols while simultaneously blocking the free ones in his coffee with cream. When his daughter showed him the study, he switched to black coffee for a week. His exact words in a comment on one of my videos: "I can't believe the fix was simpler than every supplement I've been buying." He's right. Sometimes the most powerful change isn't adding something new. It's removing what's blocking what you already have. That's a principle I come back to over and over in this research. And the casein issue extends beyond just chlorogenic acids. A 2019 study in food chemistry by Bond and colleagues showed that milk protein binding also reduces the bioavailability of other polyphenols in coffee, caffeic acid, ferulic acid, and p-coumaric acid. These compounds contribute to coffee's antioxidant capacity and its effects on the NRF2 pathway, which I've covered in detail in previous videos. Basically, casein doesn't just block one compound. It suppresses the entire polyphenol profile of your coffee. The more milk you add, the more you block. Heavy cream is actually slightly better than skim milk in this regard. The fat content partially competes with casein for binding, but neither works as well as drinking coffee without dairy entirely. Now the practical alternatives. Oat milk, almond milk, and coconut milk do not contain casein. They don't bind polyphenols the same way. If you genuinely cannot drink black coffee, and I understand that's a real preference, not a character flaw, any plant-based milk is a smarter choice for preserving the protective compounds. MCT oil is another option I see recommended often. It doesn't interfere with polyphenol absorption and adds a fat source that some people find improves the taste and mouthfeel. But don't confuse, doesn't block absorption with adds extra benefits. MCT oil is a delivery vehicle, not a therapeutic compound in this context. The second issue is more unsettling and is one I'll admit I wasn't aware of until about 8 months ago. Ochratoxin A. This is a mycotoxin, a toxic compound from mold, specifically Aspergillus and Penicillium species, that grows on coffee beans during storage and transport. Conventional coffee production involves storing green beans in warm, humid conditions for weeks or months before roasting. Those are perfect conditions for mold growth. And while roasting kills the mold itself, ochratoxin A is heat stable. It survives the roasting process largely intact. A 2020 study in food control by Kanega and colleagues tested commercial coffee samples from multiple countries and found detectable ochratoxin A in roughly 70% of conventional coffee samples tested. Now, before you panic, the levels in most samples were below the regulatory limits set by the European Food Safety Authority. But below regulatory limits and zero are not the same thing. The EFSA limit was based on acute toxicity data. What worries me more is the chronic low-dose exposure angle. You're drinking this every single day, potentially for decades. What does ochratoxin A actually do in your body? It damages mitochondrial DNA. A 2021 paper in Toxicology Letters by Fol Leskovich showed that ochratoxin A induces oxidative stress, specifically inside mitochondria, generating reactive oxygen species that damage mitochondrial DNA at rates much higher than nuclear DNA. In simple terms, it targets the energy centers of your cells and degrades the DNA that tells them how to operate. For anyone over 60, when mitochondrial function is already declining naturally, adding a daily dose of a compound that speeds up that decline is counterproductive. You're drinking coffee for the polyphenols, the chlorogenic acids, the metabolic boost, and simultaneously introducing a toxin that undermines mitochondrial integrity. It's like taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back every morning. I need to be honest about the uncertainty here. The dose-response relationship for chronic ochratoxin A exposure in humans isn't fully established. We know it's nephrotoxic, harmful to kidneys at higher doses. We know it's a group 2B possible carcinogen according to the IARC. But the specific long-term effects of the low concentrations found in conventional coffee consumed daily over decades, that data is still emerging. Some researchers argue the levels are too low to matter. Others point out that nobody has studied 40-year cumulative exposure at these levels because that study would take 40 years. I lean toward caution, especially when the fix is simple and doesn't cost significantly more. The fix: buy specialty-grade coffee. Specialty coffee is graded and scored, and the production chain from farm to cup involves much less storage time and better handling conditions. Several specialty roasters now test for mycotoxins and share the results. You can also cut exposure by buying whole bean rather than pre-ground. Ground coffee has exponentially more surface area exposed to air and moisture during storage, which speeds up any existing mycotoxin contamination. Grinding fresh daily doesn't remove ochratoxin A that's already in the bean, but it does prevent the storage-related amplification that happens with pre-ground. Dorothy, 70, had been buying the same brand of pre-ground coffee from her grocery store for years. $3 can, nothing fancy. When she switched to a specialty whole bean coffee, about $12 per bag instead of 3, she told her daughter she could taste the difference immediately, but wasn't sure it was worth 4 times the price. Then, her daughter did the math. $12 a bag, roughly 30 cups per bag. That's 40 cents per cup instead of 10 cents. A 30-cent daily difference, $9 a month. For removing a daily mycotoxin exposure from your morning routine. Dorothy's response, and I love this, I spend more than that on the Tylenol I take for the headaches I probably wouldn't have if I'd switched sooner. We don't know if that's causally connected, but the practical point stands. The upgrade costs less than most people assume. Now, how these two issues connect, and this is the part I wanted to build toward. Remember the woman I mentioned at the beginning? 41 years of coffee with milk? She was making 2 compounding mistakes simultaneously. The casein in her milk was blocking the chlorogenic acids that protect against cancer and inflammation, and the conventional pre-ground coffee she was using likely contained low levels of ochratoxin A that were slowly contributing to mitochondrial stress. She was getting less protection and more damage from the exact same habit. Not because coffee is bad, the data overwhelmingly shows coffee is beneficial, but because of how she was preparing and sourcing it. The vehicle was good, the modifications were sabotaging it. This is something I see constantly in the research. A food or compound with genuine protective benefits that gets partially or fully cancelled out by how people actually consume it. Cooking broccoli above 140 degrees destroys sulforaphane. Heating olive oil past its smoke point turns healthy fats into oxidized compounds. And adding dairy to coffee blocks the polyphenols that make it worth drinking in the first place. The pattern is always the same. The science supports the food, but the preparation method matters as much as the ingredient itself. Let me quickly address the question I know some of you are thinking. What about butter in coffee? The bulletproof coffee trend. Butter is dairy, but it's almost entirely fat. Very little casein compared to milk or cream. The polyphenol binding effect is tiny with butter or ghee. So if you're doing butter coffee, you're largely fine on the casein issue. The mycotoxin issue still applies regardless of what you add, because that's about the bean itself. What to expect if you make both changes? Within the first week, most people report that black coffee or coffee with plant milk tastes different but not worse. Your palate adjusts within 5 to 7 days. Some people notice fewer afternoon energy crashes, though that's anecdotal and could have multiple causes. Within 2 to 4 weeks, if you're tracking inflammatory markers, CRP in particular, the unblocked chlorogenic acids should start contributing to measurable reductions. This isn't guesswork. The Nurses' Health Study found that higher polyphenol absorption correlated with lower CRP levels across over 80,000 participants. If you've been blocking 28% of your polyphenol intake for years, unblocking it is a meaningful change. And the removal of daily ochratoxin A exposure, while harder to measure directly without specialized testing, stops the ongoing mitochondrial assault. Your mitochondria are under enough age-related stress without adding a daily mycotoxin attack. Over months, the cumulative effect is simply this. Your coffee habit finally delivers what the research says it should deliver instead of a watered-down version. The coffee was never the problem, the modifications were. Here's what I want you to walk away with. Coffee is one of the most studied beverages on the planet, and the data backing its protective effects is strong. But 2 common habits, adding dairy and buying conventional pre-ground, are quietly sabotaging those benefits for millions of people every morning. The casein in milk blocks up to 28% of the protective polyphenols. The ochratoxin A in conventional coffee damages the mitochondria you're trying to protect. Both problems have simple, affordable solutions. Drink it black or with plant milk. Buy specialty-grade whole bean and grind fresh. Your coffee doesn't need to become expensive or complicated. It just needs to stop working against itself. If you want to go deeper on rebuilding mitochondrial function from the ground up, I put together the complete mitochondrial reset protocol, step-by-step guide covering the foods, supplements, and daily habits that actually move the needle on cellular energy after 60. The download link is in the description below. Subscribe if you want weekly research breakdowns focused on what happens inside your body after 60. Keep investigating, and I'll see you in the next one.